Hi there, welcome everyone who's joined in for our session today. My name is James Wills, and I'm excited to be here to bring you this webinar on managing stress. I know that we can all agree there's no shortage of stress in our lives today, and we're going to spend some time talking about how to make our lives a little simpler in spite of the stressors that we're all feeling. I represent a company called Excel Through Learning, and what we're bringing to you today is some content, some ideas, and some help in terms of how we're able to manage stress, because we know that we're all living in a very hyper-stressful time. Managing stress today is truly a skill that we all need to master. In fact, I bet if you were to close your eyes right now, you'd be able to picture someone who you know that never seems to be fazed by stress. They seem almost invincible. These people really have it down, right? They are experts at managing their stress. Absolutely, they are under stress. They have just found a way to compensate and manage their own personal stress, and it is working very effectively for them because the perception is, of course, that we can't even tell they're stressed out. The session is intended to be a reminder or a refresher of some of the learning that we've all been exposed to throughout our working lives. Now, it's not going to get us to the point of living a stress-free life, but it is going to deliver us some insight and some new techniques that may help you going forward with some tools and some strategies you can use to manage the stress that's in your life. I'm completely confident you'll walk away today with a couple of new ideas that you can use going forward. Now, taking a look at this first slide here, we want to make sure that we're starting from a very common definition. Make sure that we're all on the same page as we approach the topic we're talking about today. I'm sure I don't have to remind you, but stress is definitely an everyday occurrence. The only change is the intensity of the stress we're feeling at any given time. Stress itself is actually a response to pressure and demands, and those can be either internal or external. And these responses to these stressors cause a physical or an emotional reaction. So a few key points that this definition implies for us. First, definitely the way we interpret a stressor differs from person to person. That means that the same situation can cause very different reactions depending on the individual it's happening to. So by way of example, for some of you, the thought of delivering a presentation will send your heart rate into orbit. But for others, it may just be part of a job. It's really no big deal. We need to be very aware that people react differently to the same situation because we don't work in a bubble. We are constantly collaborating in our roles, so stress becomes a natural part of the teamwork experience, and each of us internalizes stress in different situations. We're going to elaborate on this point as we continue on today. The flip side of that coin is, of course, how stress manifests itself in our largely collaborative work environment. Just as the same stressor is interpreted differently by each individual, the reactions to those stressors can also vary, and these reactions themselves will run the gamut. Again, using our previous example, one person who's asked to deliver that presentation will be completely stressed out, but they may not show outward signs of stress, whereas another may not feel stressed about the presentation at all. Some people are just better equipped to manage their stress, and it's largely a result of practice and experience in these types of situations. Again, we'll cover that as we continue through the material today. And lastly, we need to understand that stress does terrible things to us. The definition on our screen highlights the physical and emotional components of stress. That means that mental and physical health is at risk with constant and unmanaged stress. We're seeing more and more of these effects when we think of medical leaves, sick leaves, job turnover rates, and the interpersonal challenges that show up on the work floor. The key to minimizing these negative impacts of stress is our ability to manage and handle the stress that we all experience. We agree that stress is everywhere and it's every day. And on our screen there are a few sources of stress that we generally hear from our clients and our customers. Right? If we look at those images, for example, we know that stress comes from home, our family, our spouse, our kids, our neighbors. We know we feel a lot of stress at work, and it tends to revolve around workload, timelines, resources, coworkers, managers, leadership. Some of us feel more stressed in social settings, so events, group settings, travel, new experiences. And we also feel stress from technology, right? There's that pressure to be connected 24/7, having those smart devices in our palm, a little bit of a limited work-life balance. And of course, don't forget those internal pressures like personal goals, your financial goals, the bucket lists that we have in our minds, all of those sources of stress for us as we navigate through our lives. What becomes key, and what we're going to focus on today, is the way we manage the stressors that make up our own personal triggers. So for us to navigate and survive in this super stressful world, we need to be able to take charge. To minimize the impacts of stress, we need to be able to manage our thoughts, our emotions, our schedule, and the way we deal with incoming challenges. Life is full of opportunities. All too often, though, we forget that these are disguised as problems, challenges, and new experiences, all of which are potential sources of stress. And that really brings us full circle to why it's essential to be able to manage stress effectively. I mentioned earlier that stress can create serious physical and emotional damage if it's left too long. In North American society today, 75% of us report stress levels that are considered extensive or dangerous. Stress is not something we can just shrug off or not worry about. In some cases, it's a damaging and dangerous problem we need to recognize and address. So you'll see there's a web address on the bottom of your screen there from Help Guide. Help Guide discusses these 4 A's of dealing with stressful situations. Now, it's important to note that in all of these strategies, it's our personal reaction to the stressor that we need to manage. The stressor itself cannot necessarily change. To change the way we manage the stress we are presented with, we have a number of options. So we can either withdraw and avoid, or we can alter the way we see the stressor. Now, avoiding is simple and it's self-explanatory. But to alter a stressor, we need to look at the situation not as inherently stressful, but as a task that we've assigned stress to. Again, that's that reaction piece I mentioned a couple of times already. And by altering the stressor, this allows us to shift our reactions. And this forces us to either adapt, modify, and survive. The finding ways to make the situation less stressful, or we can simply accept that there is stress attached and we just need to plow through it. In each case, our reactions to the stressor are what determines how we deal with the situations. There are really only 2 things that we as human beings are in control of. One is our attitude, the other is our actions. And funny enough, our actions are often determined by our attitudes. The way we see stress has a lot to do with our attitude towards the stressor, and managing our stress is either helped or hindered by the actions we take as a result. So I'm going to challenge you today to think about this question as we work through our materials. I said before, the goal is to walk away with a couple of pieces of information that you can use right away to impact the way you're able to manage and deal with stress. As we talk together today, let's think in terms of how well we manage our own personal stress, the stuff that life constantly throws at us. And we're going to do that today by working through our own interpretations of stress. How do each of us as individuals view stress and the impacts it has on our everyday lives? We'll continue on to explore the stages, signals, and responses to stress, and then we'll spend some time talking about managing our stress. How do we cope, and what can we do to help us be more effective stress managers? But in order to do that, we need to be aware of where we are personally when it comes to our own levels of stress. So what we're going to do is start with a couple of minutes today to work through this stress test. It's a quick and simple gauge that will give us a starting point for our conversation today. So what I'm going to do is ask you to find a scrap or a piece of paper and jot down the numbers 1 through 22 on the left-hand side. On your screen, you see 22 questions. Take a read of these questions and jot down beside the number either a Y for yes or an N for no. Then we'll come back and we'll continue on with the next step. So go ahead, get started on that. I'll give you 2 minutes to read through those questions and choose either yes or no as your response. When you're done that, we'll come back together and continue on with our conversation. The calculation to these results is very simple. All we're going to do is take a look at those questions, number 1 through 22, and give ourselves 1 point for each time that we said yes to a question. Then we'll simply add up those numbers, and that's going to reveal your current perception of the stress that you have in your life. So again, give yourself 1 point for each time you said yes, take a quick calculation, and then we will continue on. For most of us, our stress levels range somewhere between that 10 and 17 mark. We're trying to balance a lot right now as wives and mothers, husbands and fathers, employees, friends. We all wear a lot of different hats. This adds to the stress levels we all feel. And then if you couple that with the work pressure and this ultra busy time that we're living in, stress levels really continue to climb. The purpose of starting here is to give us really a starting point where we can think about stress and really introduce ourselves to the idea that self-awareness is key in how effective we are in managing our own personal stress. So as I said, what that questionnaire did was get us thinking about some of the ways that stress manifests itself. We actually see stress in a number of ways. For some of us, stress is very physical. Now, I mentioned my wife before. She tends to have very physical reactions to stress, headaches, fatigue, tense muscles. Stress can really wear on the body, and we need to recognize that prolonged exposure can have very serious consequences. I also have a 3.5-year-old little boy. For those of you out there with children, you know that kids react in a more emotional way. When Carter feels stress, that is when he's told no, when we're trying to reason with him, when he wants something that he can't have, his reactions go well beyond what the situation calls for. Stress does this to us as adults as well. We can feel overwhelmed, emotionally on edge. We may become overly sensitive, and our fuse may be a little closer to the surface than it normally is. These are all common reactions to stress. It's also potentially very damaging to our relationships and to ourselves. Self-awareness is very important when we talk about the emotional impacts of stress. And lastly, we look at the performance-related side of stress. I believe I function a little better as the timeline gets closer. Of course, I'm an avid procrastinator and really need that motivation piece that comes with an impending deadline. And as we'll talk about in a little while, this is not necessarily a great habit. I do need to be careful, however, because this could lead to extra stress and the potential for failure. For example, if I waited until 15 minutes before I was presenting this to finish off this material, it could lead to a lot of extra stress. What if a situation arose where I couldn't finish up the material on time? What if a crisis comes up and there's a new priority that takes away some of the time I had allotted and planned for? Do you think there could be some mistakes, some disorganization, some sloppiness that might come into play? There can be some serious performance-related results of stress. Fortunately, there are some strategies we can all use to make sure that even though we feel stress, we're able to appropriately manage it and work through those tasks that need to get done. Earlier, we talked about some of those sources of stress. Right? So stress always comes from two places. The first stress and the first source are those external causes. Some examples of external causes are on your screen, but we commonly see things like a noisy office, a crowded workspace, deadlines, email overload, a demanding boss. The list really continues. Also high on the list is commitments for the kids or the spouse, other people's agenda, limited amount of time. We need to be aware also that life is unpredictable. Someone could just drop by unannounced, either at home or at work. Now, that experience in and of itself is not necessarily bad, but it does have an impact on your workload, on your timeline, and it adds to the stress levels. Everything is cause and effect. Life happens, and as a result of life, things can be very stressful. And of course, the second place that stress comes from is from our own internal causes. Often we can't control the external pressures that are placed on us, but we need to be very able to manage our own internal pressures. When we do recognize that we are in fact stressing ourselves out, we can finally begin to put that plan in place to better manage our stress. So there's things like fear and belief or lack thereof. which can negatively impact our stress levels. There may be a belief and a very real fear that if we don't get our piece of the project done on time, we'll be letting the project team down, and there may be repercussions from the boss. So those are internal pressures that we place on ourselves. And following that thought, perhaps there's occasion where others don't see the pressures that are placed on us when we think of stress. So in that previous example, what if in order to complete your part of the puzzle, you're waiting on another department, you're waiting on someone else before you can move forward? You have a combination of external and internal sources of stress. All of these things are linked, and all of them greatly impact our attitude and our actions. We definitely need to be experts at managing our own internal stress. So to this point, I've been talking on the negative side of stress, and that's the part we all tend to focus on in our daily lives. The reality is, however, that not all stress is bad. Stress by itself is not the problem. As this slide points out, stress can stimulate creativity and productivity. Do you ever remember hearing the phrase, necessity is the mother of invention? Stress can sometimes be helpful, but the key to successfully handling a stressful situation is the way that we're able to manage it. So I look at Olympic athletes or sports icons as great stress managers because they're really able to capitalize on the anticipation in the moment, the electricity of sport, and their years of patient training to help them perform under immense levels of pressure. Shouldn't we be able to manage those external and internal stressors to the point where we're able to use our own personal stress-filled situations to become more creative, more flexible, to look at things a little differently and to come up with new solutions? I believe that we can, but it depends on our attitude towards stress and how well we're able to manage it. There are only two ways we can handle our stress. We make the choice to either respond or to react. Now there's a difference between those two words, so I'm sure you had a thought that popped into mind there as I mentioned response versus reaction. To me, the idea of a response versus a reaction is the thought of consideration. Most of us played baseball when we were in grade school. When the ball was coming towards your face, what did you do? Well, you put your hands up and you blocked it. You wanted to protect yourself, and you did that almost without thinking. That to me is a reaction. Not much thought, just a knee-jerk reaction to the situation. As this slide points out, the reaction mode is often a stressful mode. We protected ourselves from the baseball out of fear of the pain it may or may not cause. And fear is one of our triggers of stress, one situation where most of us feel a little more stressed out than normal. A professional baseball player, on the other hand, would approach the situation quite differently. And that's because of a number of factors. The shortstop doesn't think, I need to protect myself from the ball. They're actually looking at making a play at third to stop the runner from advancing and keeping the score skewed in their favor. Quite a bit more relaxed than the reaction state. Years of practice, experience of being in that situation before, and skill all play a role in how the professional is able to handle that stress better than the fifth grader playing ball at recess. A huge difference, very big difference between reaction and responses to stress. So we need to be aware of how we're handling stress as it comes our way. So let's take a look then at some potential stressors. And what I'm going to ask you to do is, really quick as a first thought, just listen as I'm reading these situations and choose whether you are more often or more frequently respond rather than react. So I'm going to read off these situations and just say in your mind response versus reaction. Okay? If you're stuck in traffic, would you more generally respond or react? What if there's a new project added to your plate at work? What if you're given the task of training a new employee? What happens when your deadline is changed so that it's due 1 week earlier than it was first communicated to you? What if your spouse or your partner has an unannounced house guest at home when you arrive? So you typically handle stress in certain ways. You have a reaction or a response. But can we alter the amount of stress we feel in each of these situations? I believe that we can. Being stuck in traffic is a whole lot less frustrating when you know you've left yourself extra time to get to work or to your meeting. Training a new employee isn't a bad thing. Obviously, it's more stressful if you're told the morning of that you'll be training versus having been told 2 weeks prior. All of these situations are a whole lot less stressful if there's some time given to preparation and the proper communication takes place beforehand. We would more than likely be able to respond to each of these situations if we were able to appropriately and properly prepare for that stress. And that's the key to managing stress, being prepared to handle it in just about any situation. In fact, the more prepared we are for the stressor, the less stressful the result. And this comes as a direct result of stress having multiple stages. The first stage of stress is recognition. This is our cognitive awareness that we are either under stress or we aren't. Some situations cause stress, some don't. And as we've discussed before, these vary from person to person. At this stage, we make the initial determination of the situation as one we can calmly negotiate through or one that is weighing on our mind, and it may be more challenging. The next stage adds the physical components of stress. Our body begins to exhibit signs that it's under stress. We may feel more tense and our bodies continually release stress chemicals into the bloodstream. We may begin to perspire and breathing may be quickened slightly. It's definitely a less comfortable stage than recognition and may lead to some more serious challenges if that stress continues on unchecked. The third stage is our body's defense mechanism against stress. Because we become increasingly uncomfortable in the warning stages, we're working towards getting back to a more comfortable state. The resistance stage is where you begin to retreat. You may try to pretend the situation or the event doesn't exist. The caveat here is that the mind and the body still knows that it's under stress. Resistance will eventually take its toll on the immune system, the heart, and the gastrointestinal system, resulting in some dangerous physical symptoms. And the last and most dangerous stage of stress is that exhaustion stage. After constant bombardment, the body becomes completely exhausted and causes us to give up and lose self-confidence. If the stressor sticks around over a prolonged period of time, some serious mental and physical changes can materialize. Long-term exposure to stress can lead to serious health problems. Chronic stress disrupts nearly every system in your body. It can raise blood pressure, suppress the immune system, increase the risk of heart attack and stroke, contribute to infertility, and speed up the aging process. Long-term stress can even rewire the brain, leaving you more vulnerable to anxiety and to depression. We need to master our stress management techniques to ensure that this level of prolonged stress does not happen. We've talked about how bad stress can be, so let's now put the focus on making sure it doesn't get to that point. Ideally, we catch stress in the transition between the first and the second stages, and that's where we implement our stress management techniques. It's interesting to note that almost every stressful situation can be managed by taking control of our time and taking control of our information. Managing stress is all about taking charge of your thoughts, your emotions, your schedule, your environment, and the way that you deal with those incoming problems. Stress management involves changing the stressful situation when you can, changing your reaction when you can't, taking care of yourself, and making time for rest and relaxation. So we're going to talk about prioritization. And prioritization takes center stage as we try to limit the harmful effects of prolonged stress. We need to hone our abilities to recognize stress before it becomes a serious problem. Developing a plan and having a plan in place when you feel stressed can help put things back into perspective. It's been said, and I'm sure you've heard the statement, failing to plan is planning to fail. Failing to plan is also a recipe for creating a whole lot of extra stress. Setting priorities is one way to help you get your workload under control. We need to evaluate our prioritization process to ensure that it's effective and efficient, and we need to get through all of those work-related tasks. We all know that. We're all busy. We have a number of things we need to do. It's important that we get through them. Using a priority scale is going to help us to define our level of attention and give us some control over the way that we're spending our time. To prioritize effectively, we need to understand and we need to get really good at putting things in order of importance. Our plans and our to-do lists are living and working documents. They're constantly changing, And it's because our prioritization that this is the case. So we see here, the first rule of time management is not the priority level of the task, but whether it's necessary to do that task at all. So by way of example, you're working on organizing your physical workspace and trying to decide how to organize your desktop. Will moving a pile of files or documents from one side of your desk to the other help you get more organized? Not really. Moving the pile isn't the task. Doing the work that the files contain is the task. So we need to be very aware that we need to include getting the work done on our list, not just the shifting around. And that's how a lot of us organize our schedules, is we're constantly shifting things around, but we're not having the time and making the time to get the things done that are required of us. So how do we do this? Once we've determined that the task has to be done, prioritizing will help us weigh the importance of each item. So here's a useful chart to help with priority setting. So I'm going to ask you to follow along with me as we go through this flow chart. Let's go back to that example of organizing, whether it be your file drawers, getting rid of boxes, or clearing the top of your desk. Whichever, right? We're just looking at organizing. That's the task as it relates to box number 1. Then we have to ask ourselves why. What is the impact to my work, my performance, and to the people around me? Why do I need to do this? How much attention, energy, and time should I be allotting in this area? The next question would be when. How urgent is it to do this task? When and how do I fit it into my schedule? Is this something I need to do during prime time, so it's scheduled for a certain time of day? Or is this a flexible time task, so I can pick at it bits and pieces here and there, and it can be scheduled for almost any time? We then have to decide how to accomplish this task. What's the most efficient way of doing this? And lastly, we ask ourselves, what happens if this task is not completed? Do I have to do it today, tomorrow, by the end of the week? What do I have to eliminate in order to complete this task? And that last question is the key question when we're talking about prioritization. It's exactly what prioritizing is. If I need to do 3 things, A, B, and C, and then a 4th thing, D, comes along, something has to give. There's only time to do those 3 things, A, B, and C. So if something gets added, the amount of time we have doesn't increase. We need to prioritize, and we need to consider where to fit in this new addition. Using this model can really help with that prioritization process. But how do we decide what a priority is? For a lot of us, assigning a rating of importance is very helpful. Keep in mind, we're not creating a sequential plan of attack. It's just a list of things that are our priorities, and then we set out to accomplish these tasks. And if you look at that list on your screen, more than one item can be considered a number 1 item that's demanding immediate attention. Remember, we're all project managers. We're not working in a bubble. We have multiple things going on at the same time, all kinds of competing priorities. We also know we have to tackle those number 1s first. So then we have to further prioritize to see which specific task we need to focus on next. So if we're looking at that list in front of us, maybe the complaint and the letter are related. So finishing that letter will help in dealing with the complaint from ABC Company. Do the letter first, talk with your CEO, and send it out. Then connect with the client and let them know that that letter's on its way. Work your way through your list, but don't be afraid to use creativity and flexibility when you approach your tasks. And you also have the ability to tie your workload together. Again, we're managing competing projects and competing priorities all the time. We need to be managing them so that we're prioritizing to make it a more efficient and effective method of getting through all of the tasks that we have. When we're faced with our daily workload, often we feel overwhelmed and we don't necessarily know where to start. This point is a huge stumbling block for some of us. Procrastination is natural, at least I think so. We often procrastinate because we aren't sure. We may need more information. We don't like this part of our job, and 1,000 other reasons. But the fact is, procrastination is a major time waster. So how do we overcome it? Well, first step, of course, is the need to recognize that we are in fact procrastinating. If you're honest with yourself, You probably know when you're procrastinating. Procrastination can be a big source of stress for us. Leaving tasks too long, not being organized, and or having too much to do without defining priorities can all leave us more stressed than we need to be. So here's some useful indicators that will help you know when it is you're procrastinating. I'm going to ask you again, be honest with yourself as you take a quick peek through this list. There are a few things here that we all definitely do from time to time. I'm going to give you a minute. Take a glance through this list. And then if you've done any of these things, give yourself a yes and a little nod in your mind. I'll be the first one to say, I'm definitely guilty of a few of these from time to time. So take a quick read and check if these are any indicators for you that you may be procrastinating. A couple of things to clarify here. Putting off an unimportant task isn't necessarily procrastination. It may just be good prioritization. Putting off an important task for a short period of time, just because you're feeling particularly tired, isn't necessarily procrastination either, so long as you don't delay starting that task for more than a day or so, and this is something you only do occasionally. If you have a genuine good reason for rescheduling something important, then you're not necessarily procrastinating. But if you're simply making those excuses because you really just don't want to do it, then you're procrastinating and you're amplifying your level of stress unnecessarily. On to step 2. Work out why we're procrastinating. Why we choose to procrastinate can depend on both ourselves and the task. But it's important to understand which of the two is relevant in a given situation so that we can select the best approach for overcoming our reluctance to get going. One reason for procrastination is that we find a particular job unpleasant, and we try to avoid it because of that. Most jobs have some unpleasant or boring aspects to them, and often the best way of dealing with these is to get them over and done with quickly so that we can focus on the more enjoyable aspects of the job. As you can see from this slide, there are lots of reasons people procrastinate, and I'm sure each one of us here today is quite familiar with one or two of these reasons. It's interesting to note here that many of these reasons reinforce some of the internal causes of stress we talked about earlier. A lack of understanding, I should say a perceived lack of understanding, fear, the unknown, are all sources of stress, and we use them to reinforce our tendency to procrastinate. We need to be using our prioritization skills to help overcome our procrastination and limit the amount of stress we feel as a result. And step 3, we have to adopt these anti-procrastination strategies. Procrastinating is a habit. It's a pattern of behavior. That means we're not going to just break it overnight. Habits only stop being habits when we have persistently stopped practicing them. We need to use as many approaches as possible to maximize our chances of beating procrastination. And some tips are going to work better for you than others, and sometimes you simply have to try a fresh approach. So here's a few general tips that will help motivate you to get going. One tip is to make up your own rewards. For example, promise yourself a treat at lunch if you've completed a certain task, and make sure you notice how good it feels to finish those things. Ask someone else to check up on you. Peer pressure works. It's the principle behind self-help groups, and it's widely recognized as a highly effective approach. Identify the unpleasant consequences of not doing the task. If you're procrastinating because you're disorganized, use a to-do list. Prioritize. Set yourself some time-bound goals. That way, you'll have no time for procrastination. And then focus on one task at a time. Remember, we're project managers. The idea of multitasking is often a source of stress and challenge for a lot of us. The longer you can spend without procrastinating, the greater your chances of breaking this destructive habit for good. And you'll know that you've conquered procrastination when you can answer yes to the majority of these questions. Again, I'm going to give you a minute. Read over the statements on this slide, and if you agree with most of them, you're definitely not a procrastinator. Again, I'll reinforce here that these strategies we use to conquer procrastination are also tools we can use to limit the amount of stress we feel from incoming tasks. Strategies like finishing tasks before the deadline, taking care of priorities as early as possible, and being prepared all put our minds at ease and eliminate stressful thoughts associated with the jobs we have to do. This adds to our motivation and it adds to our confidence level. It's going to help us to feel less stressed when we're faced with similar tasks into the future. We've taken a look at managing our time through the use of prioritization, but as we started this section, I also mentioned that limiting our stress depends on managing information effectively as well. We live in the information age, and it's very easy to get bogged down in every part of our life. Because everything is available at our fingertips and almost instantly, we need to be prepared to handle and evaluate all the information that we receive. I'm going to ask you a few questions here. I'd just like you to think about your personal responses to these questions. Right? Just a self-reflection exercise. Do you have a smartphone? Does this phone have a work and a personal email account attached to it? Do your work notifications infiltrate your off-duty time? Do you feel compelled to check your phone if that alert bell or that chime sounds? Do you ever feel like you can't get away from work? Have you ever thought that you get too much email, either personal or work-related, or both? You know, in this day and age, we are constantly bombarded with information. And to be able to manage the stress that is involved in this, we need to become expert evaluators. We need to pick and choose what is important at any given time, sort out what's valuable, and then park the rest. Too much information can stress us out. It leaves us stretched too thin, and it adds to those feelings of being overwhelmed. Things like work emails, meeting invitations, breaking news, social media related messages, on and on. We have to begin to break this stuff down so that it fits in with our priorities. And sometimes you have to disconnect. Otherwise we end up in the exhaustion stage of stress that we talked about earlier. This connectivity is meant to make us more efficient, but we can just as easily become overwhelmed. So use our prioritization strategy to help with synthesizing and evaluating all the incoming information. And that brings us to the last stress management tip that we're going to take a look at today. The power of our attitude is truly remarkable, especially when we think about how much of an influence attitude has on your everyday life. Have you ever thought about how your attitude affects your stress level? Have you ever noticed that positive people seem to have much less stress? In fact, studies have shown that positive people have far less illness, fewer psychological problems, and are going to outlive people with negative attitudes. So go back to that person that we started with when I said, you can close your eyes and picture someone that doesn't seem to experience or be under a whole lot of stress. Is it as a result of their attitude? Is their positivity helping them to manage their stress effectively? Approaching your priorities with a positive attitude, a state of mind that's filled with the belief you'll get through, is going to help you do just that. Keep your attitude positive. Being positive will also help you feel optimistic as you approach your busy work and personal life. You'll find that your mind is clearer and you're less focused on the symptoms of stress, so you're going to be more flexible. You're going to be more creative when it comes to problem solving. Positivity is also a great source of motivation. Perhaps it's even the motivation we need to battle our way through high-stress times and come out with a greater sense of self-confidence in our skills and our abilities. Keeping a positive frame of reference will guide us through times where stress is at its peak. And if we couple this with our prioritization and organization strategies, we can limit the amount of stress that sticks with us long term. So we're going to finish today with some tips to help us manage stress in the moment. It's this type of stress that often puts on our blinders and doesn't allow us or our coping tools and strategies to guide our logical decision making. By using these tips, we'll be able to take a moment, reframe that incoming stressor, and respond rather than react at stressful times. Whether it's evaluating information or prioritizing tasks in a project, sometimes we just have to take action. Often we have the ability to change a stressful situation. We know where our personal stressors lie. Use this knowledge to create an action plan for meeting them head on. Perhaps learning some new job skills, practicing time management, or working on our interpersonal skills will help us get along with difficult people and lead us out of potentially stressful situations. Earlier, we talked about the value of prioritization. Make a daily to-do list and cross off your accomplishments. Learn to delegate tasks and be a team player. Share, don't hoard information, but make sure that the information you're sharing is valuable and pertinent to those that you're sharing it with. Ask for support when you need it. Give support when others need it. Cultivate that support system and make sure to know what tasks to tackle and in what order. A great strategy for minimizing the stress felt in those longer term tasks is to allow more time for a project than you anticipated taking. A deadline is just that, a deadline. Don't make a habit of stretching timelines, and don't stress yourself out by not getting to work earlier rather than later. If you finish ahead of time, you're a hero. You're less stressed and you feel better about the work quality because there's time to make adjustments. And of course, clean out the clutter. An organized work area signifies we're organized in other areas as well. This is another great example of how the physical environment can help to sway our mental and our emotional state, and it helps us to reduce our stress. Use this strategy in your physical work environment, your home environment, and your virtual space as well. Often we forget about the virtual space, but we tend to live our lives a lot online. Keep files, keep your information, keep your paperwork, keep your tools organized so that they're easily accessible when you need them. Create a system that works for you and take advantage of that newly found sense of order. And building on that last point, writing notes in a good organization system frees your mind from having to remember things. It also helps us to stay on track and reminds us of all those things that we've accomplished. Be sure to write down birthdays, events, other to-dos, but also write down larger things like your dreams, your goals, things you want to research or look into. If you don't have a good place to jot things down, it may be helpful to get yourself a good bound or a zippered book and then start using it. David Allen, author of the bestseller Getting Things Done, The Art of Stress-Free Productivity, says that if a task comes up and it takes 5 minutes or less to do it now. It will help keep those little jobs from building up without impacting our productivity. In the grand scheme of things, taking a little time to do these types of tasks will help you to eliminate the stressors that may occur if they're left untouched. And it does another thing in terms of helping us get those tasks completed. We may forget of those short jobs that we pushed off until later. So it's a memory aid as well. Do it now while it's top of mind, get it done, and then continue on with your project. This is perhaps a place where people tend to put the most neglect, but it's the single worst thing you can do in the face of stress. It's human nature for most of us to put others first. We worry about what our colleagues, our peers, our friends and family will think before we take stock of how this impacts us and our health. The reality is no one else is going to take care of us. We have to do it for ourselves. Remember, stress takes a toll on the body, so it's especially important to eat right, exercise, get enough sleep, and otherwise safeguard your health. When you're healthy, you're better able to withstand the toll that perpetual stress takes on your body. And building on the last theme of taking care of yourself, it's important to eat properly. Begin the day with a balanced breakfast. Human beings are not creatures of deprivation. During the day, eat when you're hungry. You need to be fueled. Snack on nuts and fruit. Choose things that are healthy. Avoid stimulants like caffeine and sugar. Right? Make other choices instead. If you feel tired, drink plenty of water. Fatigue can be a symptom of dehydration. Avoid eating that heavy or the really big lunch, which will make you feel sluggish in the afternoon. Maintain a diet that's conducive to high energy and balance, right? And that's going to go a long way to fuel your motivation and your confidence. And we all know life's going to throw us curveballs, so the better we feel, the more able we are to handle them as they come up. Most people look at this suggestion as counterproductive. Couldn't be further from the truth. If you're managing your time, your stress levels, and your project list, you're going to have some time to slow down every once in a while. Simple breaks, things like looking away from your computer screen, doing something else for a few minutes, looking out the window to stretch your eyes if you're doing detailed work. It's going to allow your body to reset and recharge. If you have no window, take advantage of your imagination. Close your eyes and imagine a panoramic view. Think about the weekend that's coming up. Think about that trip to Hawaii that you may or may not be going on in a couple of weeks. Get your mind out of work for just a couple minutes, and then you'll come back a little more refreshed and ready to tackle your task. Or maybe it's simple as a quick stretch, even from your chair. When you feel tense in your body, particularly in your lower back, make sure to stretch. While you're sitting in your chair, plop your upper body down like a rag doll. Feel limp and relaxed, and then breathe in and out. Stand up tall and perform an overhead palm press. If you're looking to prevent carpal tunnel, rotate your wrist clockwise and then counterclockwise. And it can be helpful to gently pull on each finger to release a little bit of tension. Or maybe during lunch, allocate some time to take a brisk walk outside in the fresh air and the light. This is particularly important when the days are a little bit shorter, because it helps you to deal with seasonal affective disorder. And last of all, breathe. And we're not talking the breathing we have to do to stay alive. We're suggesting some deep breathing exercises meant to relax you and ease some of your tension. Breathe in, hold your breath, hold it for a few seconds, and then exhale. Repeat this a few times. And this is even more effective if it's done with your eyes closed and your mind cleared of any thoughts. And with those tips for managing our stress, that brings us to the end of our discussion today. I'm going to go right back to where we started and remind each of us that stress is a part of our life, especially our work lives. Oftentimes we feel like we're burning the candle from both ends, trying to fit it all in and balance all of our priorities. Managing our stress is all about how well we balance all of what life throws at us. Today we've shared a few tips, tools, and strategies to help manage our stress effectively so that we don't get overwhelmed and we don't get burned out. I'd like to take a moment on behalf of myself and Excel Through Learning to say thank you for investing some of your time today. We know that you're busy. We appreciate you taking some time out of your schedule to listen and do some learning in order to help yourself eliminate some of the stress that you're feeling. I hope you're going to walk away with something that's going to help you limit the amount of stress you feel in this stressful and super busy time. We look forward to having you online again sometime in the future. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you very soon.